47 people saw what happened that morning in 1851. 47 slaves stood in a Mississippi cotton field and watched their master die in a way that defied reason. But not one of them ever spoke of it again. The county records call it an accident. The coroner's notes, sealed for 73 years, say otherwise. And what they found carved into the wood of the old cotton gin still haunts local historians to this day. Tonight, we're uncovering one of the most disturbing mysteries buried in America's past. This is the Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 1. If you love stories that blend true history with the shadows people tried to erase, hit that subscribe button right now. And tell me in the comments, are you brave enough to listen to this alone at night? Part 1. The Vanishing of Caleb. Warren County, Mississippi. September, 1851. The cotton fields shimmered under a cruel sun that morning, rows of white stretching toward the horizon, every plant heavy with the sweat and blood of those who worked them. By noon, one white man would be dead, and one slave would vanish forever. What happened that day was whispered about for generations, hidden in songs, coded prayers, and warnings told by firelight. But the ledgers, the cold, careful plantation records that documented every pound of cotton, every lash, every penny, tell a different story. Because for 3 full weeks that year, the records of the Rutledge Plantation stop. Completely blank. No cotton weights. No punishment logs. No roll calls. Nothing. As if someone had tried to erase those weeks from history. The Rutledge Plantation sat on 1,100 acres of rich Mississippi soil, just southeast of Vicksburg, where the Yazoo River bends like a broken spine. It was run by Nathaniel Rutledge, a man known for his cold precision and his cruelty. He had inherited the land, and 63 slaves, from his father. His wife was dead. His only son, a sickly boy named Thomas, was being raised by a house slave named Patience, who had lost her own child the same week Rutledge's wife had died. Every morning, the fields filled with movement and the sound of the overseer's whip, a thick, braided lash named Salvation, wielded by Virgil Pence, a man who enjoyed his work far too much. Among the enslaved workers, one man stood apart. His name was Caleb, but in the quarters, they called him Ghost. Caleb didn't look like anyone else. His skin was as pale as any white man's, his hair the color of raw cotton, his eyes pink and shining like wet glass. He was tall, silent, and strong. The others avoided him, not from hate, but from unease. They said he moved without sound, that sometimes he seemed to appear out of nowhere. Some whispered he'd been cursed. Others said he was half spirit, half man. But the truth was something far more dangerous. Caleb's mother had been a healer from Haiti, a woman who'd known the old ways, the island medicine, the knowledge of roots and poisons the white doctors called superstition. Before she died, she had passed those secrets to her son. He listened, he learned, and he remembered. By the summer of 1851, the heat was unbearable. Slaves collapsed in the fields. One old man, Marcus, died face down in the rows, his hands still clutching his cotton sack. Rutledge punished the rest by cutting their rations, claiming the man's death had cost him labor. That was when things began to change. The well water started to taste bitter. The dogs began dying, their mouths foaming white. The insects multiplied, and strange rashes spread through the quarters. Rutledge himself started feeling ill, headaches, shaking hands, a dull yellow tint in his eyes. The doctor could find nothing wrong. Patience, the house slave, noticed her master was eating less. That his hands trembled when he drank bourbon, that he'd sit on the porch for hours, staring into nothing. When she told the old field hand Isaiah, he only said one thing. Greater than, master's being prepared. Someone's getting him ready. That someone was Caleb. He had been moved to the section of field closest to the house, close enough to watch Rutledge's habits, the times he ate, drank, or visited the outhouse behind the porch. Other slaves saw him collecting things, roots, bark, plants from the swamp. When asked, he said they were for medicine, something for his aching joints. But Isaiah knew better. His grandmother had once told him about slow work, a kind of poison that killed over weeks or months. Not all at once, but drop by drop. The victim would weaken, sicken, and finally die of what looked like natural disease. On the night of September 7th, one man followed Caleb. His name was Samuel. He crept behind a tree and watched as Caleb knelt beside the creek. Caleb washed his hands and arms in a liquid that smelled sharp and strange. Then he unwrapped a bundle and sprinkled dried herbs into the water while whispering under his breath, words Samuel couldn't understand. Then Caleb looked up. Right at him. Even in the darkness, those pale eyes glowed faintly. Caleb didn't speak. He just stared until Samuel felt his stomach twist with fear. The next morning, Samuel told 3 others what he'd seen. Within 2 days, all 3 begged the overseer to reassign them to a different field, anywhere but near Caleb. And somehow, even the cruel overseer didn't argue. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Rutledge grew weaker by the day. His head pounded, his vision blurred. He couldn't eat. He couldn't think. The doctor came again but still found nothing, only a man whose pulse was weak, whose skin had gone gray, whose blood seemed thin. He wrote in his notes that the master should rest and avoid spirits. But it was far too late for that. Because what no one knew, no one except Caleb, was that for 3 months, small doses of a deadly mixture had been finding their way into Rutledge's food and bourbon. A poison so subtle that even science today would have trouble detecting it. And all it needed now was one final trigger. To be continued. Greater than in Part 2, we'll uncover what really happened in those final hours, how Caleb's plan reached its horrifying climax, and what the 47 witnesses saw that made them swear to silence for the rest of their lives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because next time, the ghosts of the Rutledge Plantation rise from the fields of Mississippi. Would you like me to continue writing Part 2, the death scene and aftermath, in the same YouTube narrative style, 1000 words, horror tone, easy American English? Clapperboard title: The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 2, Blood in the Cotton Fields. Hook for YouTube intro. Greater than Mississippi, 1851. A white man collapses in his own cotton field, bleeding from his eyes, ears, and skin, while 63 enslaved people stand frozen in silence. The county records call it an accident. But the truth was written in blood. Tonight, we continue the story of Caleb, the albino field hand who turned years of cruelty into the most precise revenge the South had ever seen. This is Part 2, Blood in the Cotton Fields. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, would you have watched what happened next, or turned away? Part 2. The plants Caleb used weren't rare. They grew right there in Mississippi, common, ordinary, and deadly if you knew what to do with them. Pokeweed root, a weed that could cause internal bleeding. White snake root, which thinned the blood until it couldn't clot. Foxglove leaves, that twisted the rhythm of the heart. And water hemlock, the most dangerous of all, that destroyed blood vessels from the inside out. Caleb measured every dose with care. He slipped the mixtures to Patience, the house slave who served the master's meals. She never asked why. The same man had taken her child years before, and she understood revenge when she saw it forming. A few drops in the bourbon decanter. A trace in the stew. Nothing anyone could taste. By early September, Nathaniel Rutledge had become a walking time bomb. His heart weak, his veins fragile, his blood barely circulating. All he needed was one hard push, and his own body would finish the job. The final straw. That push came on Saturday, September 14, 1851. Rutledge had been drinking since noon. When his overseer, Virgil Pence, brought him the week's cotton numbers, the master exploded. The yield was down 12%. Someone was stealing from him with their laziness, he said. Pence, sweating in the heat and looking for a scapegoat, said, "It's that albino, Caleb. He's been slowing down." It was a lie, but it was the lie Rutledge wanted to hear. Anger and bourbon clouded his reason. He slammed his glass down and gave the order. Greater than, at sunrise Monday, 20 lashes. Cut his rations in half for 2 weeks. Even by the brutal standards of the Rutledge Plantation, that was extreme. When the slaves heard the sentence that evening, no one spoke, but everyone felt it, the air turning heavy, thick, charged with something that wasn't just heat. Dogs barked through the night. Patience woke from nightmares she couldn't remember. And in a small shack at the edge of the quarters, Caleb prepared the last pieces of his plan. The preparation. From the rafters he took a small leather pouch filled with fine gray powder. When inhaled, it caused blood pressure to crash so fast the heart couldn't keep up. He also uncorked a tiny glass vial of clear liquid. Absorbed through skin, it triggered instant heart failure in anyone already weakened. His mother had taught him both formulas. She had warned him, "This is for the final moment, and once you use it, there's no turning back." Caleb whispered her words as he worked. Greater than, for every pain, there is a reckoning. By dawn, the mixture was ready. Monday morning, September 15th, the sky hung low and gray like hammered pewter. Even at sunrise the air felt thick enough to chew. At 6 o'clock sharp, Rutledge stepped out onto his porch. He wore a spotless white linen suit and carried his bourbon glass, his breakfast of choice. His eyes were red, his hands trembling. Beside him stood Pence, holding the whip he called Salvation. 63 slaves stood in rows before the house, eyes down, faces blank. That was how you survived. Show nothing, feel nothing, disappear while standing in plain sight. "Bring out the albino," Rutledge said. His voice sounded strained, tired, but cruel all the same. The confrontation. Caleb walked forward slowly, shirtless, silent. The morning light turned his skin almost silver. Scars marked his arms, each one carved by his own hand, each one for a person lost to the master's cruelty. He stopped 10 feet from the porch. His right hand hid the leather pouch. His left concealed the vial. He stood perfectly still. The air around him seemed to hum. Pence hesitated. Something about Caleb's calm unsettled him. But pride, and Rutledge's gaze, pushed him forward. "Strip him and tie him," Rutledge ordered, though there was nothing left to strip. 2 slaves stepped toward Caleb, their hands shaking. They'd known him for years, yet never truly known him. When they reached for his arms, Caleb moved. A blur of strength and precision. He broke their grip and stepped toward the porch, 3 quick strides, nothing anyone could stop. "You will not touch me," he said quietly, voice steady as stone. "Not with that whip, not ever again." The death of Nathaniel Rutledge. Rutledge's face turned white, then crimson with rage. He stormed down the steps, fists clenched, drunk and furious. "You dare speak to me?" he shouted. "After I bought you, fed you, owned you." And that was the moment Caleb had waited for. As Rutledge reached for him, Caleb's right hand snapped open. A cloud of fine powder burst into the air. Rutledge gasped, inhaling deeply. Before anyone could react, Caleb's left hand struck the master's chest, shattering the hidden vial in his palm. A clear liquid soaked through the thin linen. Rutledge staggered back, coughing. Then his breathing changed, ragged, desperate. He clutched his chest. A red stain spread beneath his hand. There was no wound, no cut. The blood was coming from inside. Tiny rivers of red seeped through his pores, through his sweat glands, blooming across the white suit like ink in water. Then the bleeding came from everywhere, his nose, his ears, his eyes. The slaves stood frozen. Pence's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Rutledge tried to speak, but only blood poured from his mouth. His eyes, wide with disbelief, locked on Caleb's pale face. And Caleb whispered, "Greater than, walk to your field. Walk to the place where you built your kingdom on our bodies." Rutledge turned. He actually turned and began walking, slow, jerky steps toward the cotton rows. Maybe his brain was starving for oxygen. Maybe it was shock. But to those watching, it looked like obedience. As he walked, blood dripped from his hands, from his clothes, painting the dust behind him in crimson drops. By the time he reached the first row of cotton, his entire suit was red. He collapsed there, his body sinking into the dirt, the soil of his own plantation soaking up his blood. No one moved, no one spoke, not even the birds made a sound. And Caleb, the ghost of the Rutledge Plantation, simply stood there, silent, watching the life drain from the man who had owned him. To be continued. Greater than in Part 3, we'll uncover what happened after the master's death, how the overseer tried to hide the truth, and what the slaves found carved into the wood of the cotton gin that morning. If you're still listening, you're part of a small group brave enough to walk through history's darkest corners. Hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Would you have stayed silent, or told the world what you saw? Would you like me to continue with part 3 next, the aftermath, cover-up, and strange marks in the cotton gin in the same cinematic YouTube narration style? Clapperboard title: The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 3, The Field of Blood. Hook YouTube intro: Greater than the master of Rutledge Plantation was dead. They said he fell where he ruled, in his own cotton field, soaked in his own blood. But when they found his body, something about his face made grown men run. And what the doctor discovered that afternoon was so precise, so deliberate, it could not have been an accident. This is part 3, The Field of Blood, the aftermath of a death that history tried to bury. If you're still following this story, you're one of the brave ones. Hit subscribe, and let's walk back into the fields of Mississippi, 1851. Part 3. The morning after Nathaniel Rutledge collapsed in his cotton field, silence covered the plantation like a shroud. No one spoke, no one sang, even the wind seemed afraid to move. The slaves stayed in their quarters, waiting. The dogs wouldn't bark, the birds had flown off. Only Virgil Pence, the overseer, moved. At first, he stood frozen on the porch, staring toward the cotton rows. He wanted to run and see if the master still breathed, but something deep inside told him not to. Instinct, maybe, or fear. He waited almost 10 minutes before forcing his feet to move. Finally, he loaded his pistol, called out 3 slaves he trusted, men who'd worked the plantation for years, and ordered them to follow. The barrel of his gun made sure they did. The walk into the field. They followed the trail of blood, tiny dark drops that marked the ground, drying brown under the hot Mississippi sun. The cotton was tall that year, 7 feet high in places. The stalks brushed their arms as they passed, whispering against their skin. The sound was soft but unsteady, like the field itself was breathing. Flies had already found the blood. Their buzzing grew louder as the men pushed deeper between the rows. The further they went, the heavier the air became. The smell, iron and rot, grew thick in their throats. Then, through the rustle of leaves, they saw it. A clearing, a perfect circle where no cotton grew, only trampled dirt and shadow. And in the center, lay Nathaniel Rutledge. The body, he was on his back, arms spread wide, as if nailed to an invisible cross. His legs were straight, his boots caked in mud. The white linen suit he'd worn only hours ago was now dark red, soaked through with blood. Beneath him, the ground was wet and black, the stain already sinking deep into the earth. That patch of soil would never grow cotton again. But it was his face that broke them. 2 of the 3 slaves turned and ran before they even realized they were moving, bolting through the field, screaming. Only Pence and an older man named Isaiah stayed behind. Rutledge's skin was nearly white as chalk, drained of every drop of color. His eyes were open, staring straight into the sky, pale and glazed like glass marbles. His mouth hung slack, the tongue ghost pale, almost bleached. Tiny red dots, thousands of them, covered every inch of his skin. Petechia, though no one there knew the word. Dried blood streaked from his nose, ears, eyes, and mouth. It looked as though he had bled from every pore in his body. And yet, his expression wasn't pain. It was peace. As if, in the final seconds of life, he'd felt relief, like death had been a mercy. Isaiah swallowed hard and whispered one word. Greater than, poison. Pence turned to him. What do you mean? Isaiah shook his head slowly. Greater than, not the kind that kills quick. Something slow, something smart. That ghost planned this for months, and we never saw it. The doctor arrives. By mid-afternoon, a doctor came from town, Drive. Hiram Kendrick, an older man who'd seen more sickness and death than most soldiers. He examined the body in silence while Pence hovered close, trying to hide his shaking hands. When Kendrick finished, his face was gray. He said only, this was no fever. No curse. This was deliberate. But what he found went far beyond what anyone expected. Rutledge's liver was swollen and scarred. His kidneys were inflamed. The tiny vessels in his heart and brain had burst like glass threads under heat. His entire circulatory system was collapsing long before his final breath. The doctor found powder inside Rutledge's lungs, fine, gray dust that must have been inhaled just before death. He found chemical burns across the chest, where something corrosive had soaked through the fabric. Every sign pointed to one truth. This wasn't sudden. This was months in the making. Dr. Kendrick's notes. That night, after the body was moved to the house, Drive, Kendrick sat alone at his desk. Candlelight flickered over the papers as he wrote in his notebook, slow, careful, afraid. Greater than this was murder. Sophisticated, calculated, executed with knowledge that rivals my own. The perpetrator understood human anatomy, understood toxins, understood how to weaken the body over time. This was not the work of an ignorant man. Kendrick paused, his pen hovering. Greater than this was the work of someone trained, someone who knew the natural world the way a surgeon knows his tools. He sealed the notes in an envelope and hid them behind a loose floorboard in his office. He would never speak of them again. Because to admit the truth, that an enslaved man had outsmarted, outplanned, and outkilled his master with surgical precision, would destroy the lie that held the South together. To speak those words aloud would be to say that slaves were not property, not beasts, but men capable of knowledge, strategy, and vengeance. So Drive, Kendrick chose silence, and the official story became something else entirely. Greater than, Nathaniel Rutledge died suddenly in his field. A tragic case of apoplexy. The papers printed it the next day. No mention of blood, no mention of poison, no mention of Caleb, the ghost who had already vanished. The whispering fields. But among the enslaved, the truth moved like wind through the cotton. They whispered it at night, passing it from mouth to mouth. Greater than, the ghost took him. Justice came in daylight. The blood fed the soil. And when the moon was full, they swore the cotton in that clearing grew taller than anywhere else, white blossoms streaked faintly with red, like the field itself remembered. To be continued. Greater than in Part 4, we'll uncover what happened when the sheriff arrived, why no one could find Caleb, and what strange symbols appeared carved into the cotton gin door that very night. If you're still here, you've walked through the field of blood. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Do you think Caleb escaped, or something else took his place? Would you like me to continue with Part 4 next, The Vanishing of Caleb, with the same eerie, cinematic storytelling for narration and script pacing? Clapperboard title: The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 4, The Vanishing of Caleb. Hook YouTube intro. Greater than when the sheriff came to Rutledge Plantation, he expected to find a murderer. What he found instead was silence. No tracks, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Caleb, the man they called the ghost, was gone. But that night, something strange appeared carved into the cotton gin door. This is Part 4, The Vanishing of Caleb. Stay until the end, because what happened in the days that followed would haunt Mississippi for generations. Part 4. By the time Sheriff Alden Graves arrived at Rutledge Plantation, the master's body had already been buried. The funeral was small and tense. The coffin, sealed tight. No one wanted to talk about how Nathaniel Rutledge had really died. The sheriff had heard rumors, talk of blood, poison, and a slave with skin pale as bone, but the official record said, natural causes. Still, Alden Graves had been a lawman for 20 years, and he knew lies when he heard them. The sheriff's arrival. He rode up just before sundown, the wheels of his wagon crunching over the dry dirt. The plantation looked deserted. The slaves were locked in their quarters, the overseer nowhere in sight. Only the house stood tall and silent against the orange sky. Dr. Kendrick waited on the porch, smoking his pipe, eyes hollow. He greeted the sheriff with a nod that said he didn't want to be there either. Graves stepped down and looked around. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. "Where's the overseer?" Graves asked. "In the barn," Kendrick said quietly. "Hasn't been right since yesterday." Graves frowned. "Why?" The doctor exhaled a long cloud of smoke. "Greater than, because the man swears he saw Caleb walk into the field last night, after we buried Rutledge." The vanishing. That caught the sheriff's attention. "Walked? You mean, he's alive?" Kendrick hesitated. "That's what Pence said. But we searched. There's no trail, no tracks, Nothing. Graves squinted toward the cotton fields. The sun had dipped low, throwing the stalks into shadow. The rows looked endless, an ocean of gray-green leaves swaying gently in the breeze. He decided to look for himself. The search. The sheriff, the doctor, and 2 of his deputies walked out with lanterns. The light from the flames cast long, crooked shadows across the plants. Every sound seemed too loud. The crunch of boots, the hiss of wind, the distant rustle that might have been an animal, or something else. "Over here," one deputy called. They found the clearing, the same circle where Rutledge had died. The ground still bore the dark stain where his blood had soaked the soil. But that wasn't what froze them. In the center of the clearing stood a shape, tall, pale, unmoving. For a heartbeat, the sheriff thought it was Caleb. But as the lanterns came closer, they saw it wasn't flesh at all. It was clothing, Caleb's torn shirt and trousers, hung upright on a wooden frame made from snapped cotton stalks, arranged like a cross. The fabric was stiff, crusted with reddish-brown stains. Something white glimmered inside the collar, a small, flat bone, carved with strange, looping symbols. Graves stared at it, uneasy. "What the hell is that, Doctor?" Kendrick's voice trembled. "Greater than, I don't know. But I think it means we should leave." The symbols. The next morning, they found more of them. Symbols carved into the wood of the cotton gin, dozens of markings that no one could recognize. Spirals, eyes, twisting vines, and strange letters that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. Some said they were African sigils, protective symbols brought from across the ocean. Others said they were curses, warnings for the living to stay away. But what scared the sheriff most was that no one could explain how they appeared. The night before, the wood had been clean. By sunrise, it looked as if it had been branded by fire. When the sheriff asked who might have done it, Isaiah, the old slave, said quietly, "Greater than, it wasn't done by hands." The fear spreads. By the end of that week, half the slaves had fled into the swamps. The overseer, Pence, started drinking himself blind. He swore he could hear footsteps at night outside his window, soft, deliberate steps that stopped whenever he looked out. He claimed he saw white fingerprints on the glass one morning, prints that bled into the wood when he tried to wipe them away. The remaining workers refused to go near the cotton gin after dark. They said they heard singing inside, low, broken voices humming in a language no one knew. Dr. Kendrick finally packed his bags and left, saying he'd seen enough of death in that place to last 10 lifetimes. But the sheriff stayed one more night. He wanted answers. He got something else. The last night, that night, the wind picked up for the first time in days. The old trees groaned and bent. Sheriff Graves sat on the porch, lantern beside him, revolver across his lap. Around midnight, he saw movement, a pale figure crossing the yard, slow and steady, heading toward the cotton gin. Graves jumped up and followed, his boots pounding against the dirt. "Stop! Who's there?" he shouted. No answer. He raised the lantern, its flame flickering in the wind, and there it was. A man, tall and thin, standing at the cotton gin door. His skin seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "Caleb," the sheriff whispered. The figure turned its head. For a brief second, the sheriff saw the face, empty eyes, no color, just light. Then, the lantern flame went out. Darkness swallowed everything. When he relit it seconds later, the figure was gone. The door to the gin was wide open. Inside, carved deeper than before, were new words. Fresh, sharp, still bleeding sap. Greater than, the debt is not yet paid. The aftermath. By dawn, the sheriff left the plantation and never returned. He resigned from his post 2 weeks later. The land changed hands several times after that. Every new owner left within a year. Some went mad, some vanished, and every season, the same thing happened. The cotton in that circle grew faster, taller, whiter than anywhere else. But no one ever touched it. The locals began calling it the Field of Ghosts. They said at night, when the moon was full, a man with pale skin could be seen walking between the rows, his footsteps silent, his face calm. Looking for something, or someone, who still owed a debt. To be continued. Greater than in Part 5, we travel 10 years forward, to the eve of the Civil War, when a new family moves onto the abandoned Rutledge land, unaware of the curse that still sleeps beneath the soil. If you've made it this far, you've seen what happens when revenge refuses to die. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Do you believe Caleb's spirit is still out there, or did the land itself learn his rage? Would you like me to continue with part 5 next, when the new family moves in and begins uncovering the curse's legacy before the war, in the same American YouTube horror narration style 1000 words? Clapperboard title: The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 5, The New Masters. Hook YouTube intro. Greater than 10 years after the death of Nathaniel Rutledge, the plantation stood silent. The cotton fields grew wild. The big house rotted from the inside out. Locals said the ground was cursed, that no white man could live there without losing his mind. Then one family ignored the warnings. They came for wealth. They found something waiting for them. This is Part 5, The New Masters. Part 5. By 1859, the Rutledge Plantation had become a place people crossed the road to avoid. No one farmed the land anymore. The cotton had gone to seed, choking the fields in pale white ghosts. The house itself leaned like a dying man, shutters missing, porch half collapsed, vines crawling up its sides. Locals said you could still see the lights in the fields on moonless nights, glimpses of lanterns that vanished when you got close. And sometimes, if the wind was right, you could hear faint humming, like a lullaby sung through the soil. The new family. That summer, a man named Thomas Wilkes bought the land at auction. He was 38, a former Confederate supply officer turned farmer. The war had not yet begun, but tension was in the air, and Wilkes believed the South's future would be built on cotton and ambition. He arrived with his wife, Eleanor, and their 2 children, Clara age 12 and Samuel age 8. They were city folk from Natchez, not used to country life. When they first saw the plantation, Eleanor gasped. "Greater than, it looks like it's been waiting," she whispered. Thomas laughed. "Then it's been waiting for the right man. The field of ghosts." The locals had warned him about the field. A patch of land behind the barn where cotton grew faster than anywhere else. No matter how dry the season, it stayed lush, bright white against the dull green around it. The old sheriff, Graves, now gray-haired and half-blind, had told Wilkes plainly. "Greater than, don't touch that field. Not a stalk, let it be." But Thomas was not a superstitious man. To him, ghosts were stories made up by poor men to excuse their failures. By the second week, he had ordered his laborers to clear the ghost patch for planting. That was his first mistake. The first night, that evening, the sky turned black with thunderclouds though no rain fell. The air felt thick, electric. At dinner, the family's voices echoed strangely in the empty rooms. Every sound came back doubled, like the house was listening. Little Samuel said, "Mama, someone's humming upstairs." Eleanor froze. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the ceiling. "A song, like the one you hum when you brush my hair." But Eleanor hadn't sung all day. Thomas scolded him for making up stories and sent him to bed. At midnight, Eleanor heard it too, a low, rhythmic hum drifting down from the attic, rising and falling like breath. When she gathered the courage to check, she found nothing but dust and the faint smell of dried flowers and something metallic, like old blood. Signs in the soil. The next morning, the workers refused to enter the ghost field. They said their shovels struck bones beneath the roots. Thomas dismissed them, claiming they'd hit old fence posts. But when he dug one up himself, what he found wasn't wood. It was a jawbone, human, with teeth stained dark red. He buried it quickly, said nothing to his wife, and went back to work. That night, the humming returned, louder now, closer. This time, it came from outside, drifting in through the open windows like a breeze carrying a voice. The melody was mournful, sad, and somewhere in that song, Eleanor swore she heard words. "Greater than, the debt is not yet paid." The child's drawing. 3 days later, Clara brought her mother a drawing. It showed the plantation fields and a pale figure standing among them, tall, thin, with no eyes. "Who is that?" Eleanor asked gently. "The man who watches the cotton," Clara said. He was outside my window last night. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She looked out at the yard but saw nothing, just the swaying cotton, shimmering white in the heat. That evening, she begged Thomas to leave the land. But he refused. You're letting ghost tales frighten you. I've put too much money into this place. He poured himself bourbon and went outside to check the fields. The sun was sinking low, bleeding orange light through the stalks. And there, between the rows, he saw movement. A pale figure, watching him. The man in white. Thomas called out, "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. It stood still, silent, its outline flickering slightly, as if the heat itself was shaping it. Thomas stepped closer, gripping his lantern. "Answer me." The figure finally moved, just its head, turning slowly until its face was visible. Pale, colorless, eyes pink like raw flesh. Thomas dropped the lantern. The flame went out. He ran back to the house, breath ragged, and locked the door behind him. When Eleanor asked what happened, he lied. Just one of the workers. Nothing to fear, but his hands were shaking too hard to pour another drink. The blood in the water. 2 nights later, the well turned red. When Samuel tried to fetch water, the bucket came up filled with a dark, sticky liquid. Eleanor screamed, thinking it was blood. Thomas insisted it was rust from the old pipes, but deep down, he knew better. The smell was wrong. It wasn't metal, it was decay. That night, he sat awake by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the ghost field. The cotton swayed though there was no wind. And just before dawn, he saw him again. Caleb. The return. The albino's figure glowed faintly in the gray morning light, his body half shadow, half mist. He walked the same path Rutledge had taken 10 years earlier, blood once marking every step. Thomas watched, frozen, as Caleb stopped at the edge of the field and turned toward the house. For a brief second, Thomas could swear he saw others behind him, dozens of shadowed shapes, men and women, eyes hollow, faces familiar from old portraits in the parlor. Then Caleb raised his hand and pointed, straight at the window where Thomas stood. The glass cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Thomas stumbled backward, heart pounding, breath shallow. When he looked again, the figure was gone. Only the cotton moved, whispering in the dawn breeze. To be continued. Greater than in Part 6, the haunting intensifies. The Wilkes family learns what the land remembers, and what it demands. A secret diary, a buried altar, and the first blood of the new generation spilled on cursed ground. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me. Would you have stayed another night on Rutledge Plantation? Would you like me to continue with Part 6, The Blood Offering, next 1000 words, same cinematic YouTube horror tone? Clapperboard title. The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 6, The Blood Offering. Hook intro for YouTube. The Wilkes family thought the haunting would fade with time. But evil roots run deep on cursed ground. Beneath the fields of Rutledge Plantation lies something older than any ghost. Something that feeds on blood, on memory, on guilt. This is Part 6, The Blood Offering. The curse wakes. Morning came heavy and gray. Fog hung low across the fields like a sleeping spirit refusing to leave. Thomas Wilkes had not slept. His eyes were sunken, his hands trembled from fear and whiskey. He sat at the kitchen table, staring into the cold ashes of last night's fire. Eleanor moved quietly behind him, her steps soft. When she placed a hand on his shoulder, he flinched. Greater than, Thomas, what did you see out there? He didn't answer, just whispered, greater than, he knows my name. Eleanor frowned. Who? Thomas looked up, eyes hollow. Greater than, the man in white. The whispers in the walls. That night, the house began to whisper. Faint voices bled through the walls, slaves' prayers, cries, songs half remembered. Sometimes, Eleanor thought she heard her own name in them, as if the house was learning her voice. When she held a candle close to the wallpaper, she noticed faint handprints burned into it, small, child-sized, black against the faded yellow. She tried to scrub them away, but they grew darker. By morning, Samuel was sick. He shivered even in the heat, muttering words in his sleep. Greater than, he's waiting, the field man is waiting. The journal. While searching for medicine in the attic, Eleanor found a leather-bound book wedged between floorboards. It was Nathaniel Rutledge's journal. The first pages spoke of wealth, cotton, and pride. But later entries grew strange, filled with guilt, fear, and a name written over and over again, Caleb. One passage was circled in dark ink. Greater than, the land took the blood. It grew white as snow. He sang while dying. The soil drank him, and now it breathes. Another page read, greater than, when I tried to till the cursed field, the voices rose from beneath. I built an altar there to quiet them. But they want more, always more. Eleanor's hands shook. She turned the final page. There was a rough sketch, a circle of stones and something that looked like a knife buried beside it. Beneath it, 4 words. Greater than, blood must remember blood. The altar. Eleanor waited until Thomas went to town for supplies. She followed the path in the sketch, through the wild cotton and into the ghost field. The air grew colder with every step. Birds stopped singing. Even the insects fell silent. Then she saw it, half buried under roots and vines, a ring of black stones, charred as if struck by lightning. In the center was a shallow pit filled with dried, reddish soil. When she knelt to touch it, a shiver ran through her whole body. Voices rose in her ears, low, mournful, distant. One word repeated, remember. She backed away, stumbling, heart racing. Something shifted in the soil, like something alive beneath it. She turned and ran back to the house, the sound of whispering footsteps following her through the field. Thomas's denial. When Thomas returned, Eleanor begged him to leave the plantation. She showed him the journal, the drawings, the cursed altar. But he only laughed bitterly. Greater than, superstition. Nothing more. The land's fertile, that's what matters. Eleanor snapped. Can't you see it's killing us? Look at Samuel. But Thomas refused. He'd lost too much money, too much pride. He couldn't let go, not even as the house decayed around them. That night, the fog returned thicker than before. The lamps burned dim, their flames bending sideways as if blown by invisible breath. In the distance, the ghost field glowed faintly under the moon, white as bone. The boy's nightmare. Samuel's fever worsened. He thrashed in bed, crying out in a voice that wasn't his own. Greater than, Father, he says come back, the field is hungry. When Eleanor tried to comfort him, his small hand grabbed hers with unnatural strength. His eyes opened, but they weren't blue anymore. They were pale pink, almost glowing. He whispered, greater than, he says blood must feed the root. Then he went still. Eleanor screamed for Thomas. But when he ran into the room, Samuel was sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had happened. The blood in the cotton. At dawn, Thomas went to the field again, determined to prove there was no curse. He cut open a cotton bowl, and froze. Inside, instead of soft white fiber, was a sticky red stain. He touched it with his finger. It smelled like iron. Blood. He stepped back, shaking, as the morning light flickered strange, like shadows were moving under the plants. The humming began again, low and rhythmic, surrounding him. It came from below the soil, hundreds of voices chanting a name he didn't know. Greater than, Caleb, Caleb, Caleb. The ground began to shift, like it was breathing. Thomas dropped his tools and ran for the house. The return of the sheriff. That afternoon, Sheriff Graves came to check on them. His hair was nearly white, his skin paper thin, his eyes heavy with memory. When Eleanor showed him the journal, he grew pale. Greater than, I told Rutledge to burn that altar. He wouldn't listen. He turned to Thomas. Greater than, you stirred the soil. You set them free again. Thomas clenched his fists. I don't believe in ghosts, Sheriff. Graves stared at him coldly. Greater than, then pray they don't believe in you. That night, Graves left a silver crucifix at their door and told Eleanor to keep it burning with a candle through the night. He didn't stay. He knew what was coming. The night of fire. Near midnight, the wind howled like screams. The crucifix candle blew out without warning. The air turned thick with the smell of rotten ash. Every window began to rattle. Clara woke up crying, clutching her ears. Greater than, Mama, they're singing again. Thomas grabbed his rifle and ran outside, shouting into the dark. Greater than, show yourself. The field shimmered faintly, Hundreds of ghostly figures standing among the cotton rows, their bodies pale and torn, their faces blank and glowing. At the front stood Caleb, the man in white. He raised one hand and pointed toward the house. Then the cotton caught fire, silent blue flames that didn't burn the plants, only the air. Thomas fell to his knees as the ghost voices rose in a single, thunderous whisper. Greater than, the blood must remember. The ground split open beneath the altar, light pouring out like molten gold and blood mixed together. Eleanor pulled Clara and Samuel close, watching in terror as the world outside turned red. To be continued. Greater than in Part 7, the Wilkes family will uncover the final secret buried beneath the altar. And learn the true origin of the curse. The dead are not haunting the land. The land is haunting the living. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me. Would you have opened the altar, or run before nightfall? Would you like me to continue with Part 7, the root of the curse, next same tone, 1000 words. Clapperboard title. The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 7, The Root of the Curse. Hook intro for YouTube. Greater than the fire in the fields should have ended the nightmare. But what burns above can't destroy what lives below. Beneath Rutledge Plantation, something ancient still breathes. Waiting for blood, waiting for remembrance. This is Part 7, The Root of the Curse. The ashen morning. The next morning smelled of smoke and wet earth. Half the cotton fields were blackened, yet somehow alive. New shoots already pushing through the ash. Thomas Wilkes wandered among them, boots sinking into the soft ground. Every step left a faint red stain, like blood rising through the soil. Eleanor stood on the porch clutching Clara and Samuel. The children were pale, silent. Even the birds refused to sing. When Thomas looked back at the house, he thought he saw faces in the windows. Thin, hollow, watching him. The stranger at the gate. Just after noon, a wagon creaked up the dirt road. An old man climbed down, tall and thin, with a cane carved from bone. He introduced himself in a deep voice. Greater than, drive, Elijah Marin. I studied with Dr. Kendrick. Heard there was sickness on this land. Thomas nodded slowly. The name Kendrick stirred a memory, the doctor who'd examined Nathaniel Rutledge years ago. Eleanor led Marin inside. The man's eyes moved over the house like he'd seen it before. Greater than, you're standing on the wound itself, he muttered. And it's open again. Dr. Marin's story. That night, by lamplight, Marin told them the truth Kendrick had hidden. Decades ago, before the Civil War, the plantation was built on sacred tribal ground. The Natchez people had buried their priests here, along with offerings of blood and bone to keep balance with the earth. When Rutledge took the land, he dug up the burial mound and used the bones to mark his field corners. He thought it would bring luck to his crops. But he disturbed something older than luck. A guardian spirit bound to the soil by sacrifice. Once awakened, it demanded balance. It demanded blood. Marin's voice lowered. Greater than, every master who tilled this ground fed it, sometimes with the whip, sometimes with the noose. The earth remembers every drop. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. Greater than, and now it's remembering us. Marin nodded. Greater than, because you woke it again when you burned the field. The map below. The doctor produced an old parchment, edges burnt, covered in strange symbols. He spread it across the table. It showed the plantation, house, field, river, but beneath it, a second layer, tunnels, chambers, and a central pit marked with a spiral. Greater than, the altar you found is only the mouth, Marin said. The root runs deep. If the spirit isn't sealed again, it'll consume everything above it. Thomas, desperate and shaking, demanded to know how. Greater than, you'll need what Rutledge stole, Marin replied. The bone relics. He hid them before he died. Find them. Return them. Then he added quietly. Greater than, but beware the guardian. It doesn't forget faces. The first relic. The search began at dawn. Eleanor led the way through the old slave quarters, guided by whispers that rose and fell like wind. Behind a cracked hearthstone, she found a small pouch of ash and bone tied with thread. Inside was a fragment of carved ivory, Smooth, warm to the touch, almost pulsing. When she held it, the air shimmered. For a heartbeat, she saw a vision. Hundreds of enslaved people standing in the field, eyes bright, hands clasped in prayer. Then it vanished. She dropped the bone, trembling. Doctor. Marin picked it up gently. Greater than, the first relic, he said. We're running out of time. Dash dash dash. The blood rain. By afternoon, thunderheads rolled in from nowhere. But the rain that fell wasn't water. It was thin and red, like diluted blood. Every drop sizzled on the ground, leaving small dark pits in the earth. Inside the house, walls began to bleed from the seams. Crimson lines ran down the wallpaper like tears. Samuel and Clara screamed. The crucifix melted as if made of wax. Eleanor cried out. Greater than, what do we do? Doctor. Marin's eyes glowed in the flickering light. Greater than, finish what was started. Bring the relics to the altar before the moon rises. Dash dash dash. Descent into the root. They followed Marin into the fields, through fog so thick it felt alive. The altar stones pulsed faintly, veins of light running through them. Marin drew a circle in the dirt with his cane and began chanting in an ancient tongue. The earth trembled and split open, revealing stairs made of black stone leading downward. Eleanor hesitated, clutching her children. Thomas whispered, Greater than, if we don't go, it'll take them anyway. So they descended. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with the smell of copper and mold. Roots twisted through the walls, thick and red like veins. Some pulsed, as if blood still flowed through them. Dash dash dash. The chamber of faces. At the bottom was a wide chamber lit by a dull red glow. The walls were carved with faces, hundreds of them, screaming, crying, silent. In the center stood a stone basin filled with dark liquid. Above it hung a skeleton, suspended by its ribs, swaying gently as if breathing. Doctor. Marin approached the basin and dropped the ivory fragment inside. The liquid hissed. Then, one by one, the carved faces opened their eyes. Greater than, more, they whispered. Bring the rest. Eleanor's legs nearly gave way. Thomas held her steady. Greater than, we have to finish it. Dash dash dash. The second relic. They found the next relic buried in the dirt beneath the skeleton, a small charm of braided hair and bone. When Eleanor touched it, a shock ran up her arm and she heard a single heartbeat echo through the chamber. Doctor. Marin took it reverently and placed it into the basin. The floor rumbled. The liquid began to rise, forming a column that shaped itself into a human figure. A man with hollow eyes and a crown of thorns made of roots. Greater than, Caleb, Eleanor whispered. He smiled faintly. Greater than, you've remembered my name. Dash dash dash. Caleb's truth. Caleb spoke, his voice deep and echoing like wind through tunnels. Greater than, I was the first to die here. I bled for their cotton, for their greed. But death did not end me. It made me keeper of the soil. When Rutledge poisoned me, he bound his blood to mine. Now every master feeds the same hunger. He looked at Eleanor with sorrow. Greater than, you cannot break the curse. Only complete it. Eleanor stepped closer. Then tell me how. Caleb's form flickered. Greater than, one more relic. The heart, hidden where the house was built. Return it, or watch the land devour your children. Dash dash dash. The warning. Before they could speak again, the chamber shook violently. The roots on the walls burst open, spraying black blood. Doctor. Marin shouted. Greater than, it's waking faster than I thought. Go, find the heart. He stayed behind, chanting louder, holding the column of red light in place as the Wilkes family fled up the stairs. The last thing Eleanor saw before the opening sealed was Marin's face, glowing, serene. As the roots wrapped around him and pulled him into the earth. To be continued. Greater than in Part 8, the Wilkes family races to uncover the final relic, the heart of the curse, hidden beneath their own home. But the house itself is alive, and it doesn't want to let them leave. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have gone down those stairs, or let the land take its due? Would you like me to continue with Part 8, The Heart Beneath the House, next same tone, 1000 words. Clapperboard title, The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 8, The Heart Beneath the House. Hook intro for YouTube. Greater than the curse wasn't buried in the fields. It was beating right under their feet. The Wilkes family thought they escaped the ghosts of the plantation. But the real evil lived inside their home. This is part 8. The heart beneath the house. After the descent, when the earth sealed behind them, the sound was like a coffin lid closing. Thomas Wilkes pulled Eleanor and the children toward the porch. The sky was bruised purple, clouds rolling like a storm that wouldn't break. The house loomed ahead, tall, silent, watching. From the outside, it looked untouched. But as they stepped through the front door, they knew something had changed. The air was thick, almost alive. The floors creaked, though no one walked on them. Somewhere deep in the walls, something breathed. Eleanor whispered, "It's in the house now." A note in the wall. Thomas lit a lantern and searched the parlor. Every mirror was cracked. Every portrait had changed. In Nathaniel Rutledge's painted eyes, blood seemed to swirl like ink in water. Clara pointed to the fireplace. Something was sticking out from behind a loose brick, an envelope, yellowed with age. Thomas pulled it free and unfolded it. Inside was a single page, written in a slanted, nervous hand. Greater than, the heart must stay buried where the blood first spilled. Beneath the cradle, beneath the child who carried the curse. N.R. Eleanor froze. The cradle, she whispered. The nursery. The whispering stairs. The family moved up the staircase slowly. The wood moaned under their feet. Halfway up, Samuel stopped. He tilted his head. "Do you hear it?" Thomas listened, and heard faint whispers beneath the sound of his own heartbeat. Words, not quite English, sliding through the air like smoke. The lantern flickered. For a moment, the wallpaper seemed to ripple like skin. Faces pressed outward, eyes closed, mouths moving in silent screams. Eleanor grabbed Samuel's hand. "Don't listen. Just keep walking." The nursery. The door to the nursery stood half open. It creaked as Thomas pushed it. The room smelled of dust and lilacs, but the scent was mixed with something metallic, blood. The cradle sat in the center, exactly where they'd left it. Only now, it rocked on its own, slowly, back and forth. Each creak matched the rhythm of a heartbeat. Creak, creak, thump. Eleanor took a trembling step closer. "It's under there." Thomas knelt, brushing aside the old rug. The wood beneath was stained dark, almost black. He pried at the boards until one came loose with a wet crack. Underneath was soil, red, wet, pulsing faintly with light. The heart, Eleanor gasped. At the center of the hole was something that moved. It was shaped like a human heart, but larger, its veins spreading into the surrounding earth like roots. Each pulse sent a tremor through the floorboards. Samuel whimpered, "It's alive, Mama." Thomas's voice shook. This is what he meant. This is where it started. They watched, horrified, as blood began to seep upward through the boards, running toward their feet. The house itself was feeding the thing. Caleb returns. A cold wind swept through the room, though every window was shut. The lantern flame turned blue. Then, in the corner of the nursery, shadows gathered and formed into a shape. A tall, pale figure with hollow eyes and the faint shimmer of moonlight around him. "Caleb, greater than, you found it," he said softly. "The heart that binds us all." Eleanor stepped forward. "Tell us how to stop it." He looked at her with sadness. "Greater than, you can't stop what was born in blood. You can only end the line that carries it." Thomas shook his head. "No, there has to be another way." Caleb's gaze turned toward the cradle. "Greater than, the child who sleeps above the heart must never live to see the sun rise. Only then will the curse rest." Eleanor froze, pulling Samuel and Clara close. "You mean, my children?" Caleb didn't answer, but his expression said everything. The house turns. Before they could speak again, the walls began to shake. Cracks ran up the plaster like veins. The floor tilted. The cradle slid across the room, slamming against the wall. From beneath it, a sound rose, a wet, rhythmic thumping that grew louder and louder until it became deafening. The windows shattered. Blood poured from the walls like rain. Thomas grabbed the lantern and threw it at the heart. Flames burst, licking up the walls, but instead of burning, the fire turned black, spreading like ink. The doctor's return. Through the chaos, another voice echoed, a voice Eleanor knew. Dr. Marin. He stepped from the shadows, his body pale and thin, his eyes glowing faintly red. He looked neither dead nor alive. Greater than, I held it back as long as I could, he said, voice trembling. But the root's awake now. It wants to be whole. He reached into his coat and pulled out the remaining relics, the bone charms from the chamber below. Greater than, there's still a chance. We can seal it, but it will cost you. Eleanor didn't hesitate. Tell me what to do. Greater than, blood for blood, Marin said. A life freely given to feed the land. Only love can balance hate. He looked at her children. Greater than, the curse demands innocence, but it will accept sacrifice. The choice. Thomas grabbed Eleanor's shoulders. No, you're not doing this. We'll find another way. She met his eyes. There is no other way. He said love can balance hate. She kissed Samuel's forehead, then Clarice. The children clung to her, crying. Caleb watched silently, his expression unreadable. Eleanor stepped toward the hole, her dress soaking in the rising blood. She held out her hands to Marin. Tell me when. The doctor's face softened. When you feel it take your heart. She nodded once, and then knelt beside the pulsing red shape. The sacrifice. Eleanor placed her palms on the heart. It was warm, alive. It beat against her hands like something desperate. She whispered a prayer, though she no longer believed in any god that could hear her. Then she pressed harder. The heart shuddered. Her veins glowed red beneath her skin. Thomas screamed her name, but she only smiled through her tears. Greater than, it's okay, she said softly. It's finally over. Her body began to sink into the floor, drawn downward as if the earth itself was swallowing her. Caleb bowed his head. Marin closed his eyes. When the last of her vanished, the light in the room died. Silence followed. Aftermath. When Thomas opened his eyes, the nursery was empty. The cradle was gone. The floorboards were whole again. The air felt clean, still. For the first time in years, sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the windowsill. Samuel whispered, "Is it over?" Thomas held him close. "I think, she made it over." But deep below, where light could never reach, the faintest sound still pulsed. A single heartbeat. Waiting. To be continued. Greater than in Part 9, years later, the plantation stands abandoned. Until a group of historians uncover the ruins and awaken what never died. The curse was never destroyed. It was only sleeping. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. What would you have done if your home had a heartbeat? Would you like me to send Part 9, The Awakening, 1000 words, same eerie tone and cinematic pacing next? Clapperboard title. The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 9, The Awakening. Hook YouTube intro. Greater than they thought the curse was buried. But time doesn't kill what feeds on memory. When a team of historians unearth the ruins of the old plantation, something buried for generations starts to breathe again. This is Part 9, The Awakening. The return to Rutledge. The year was 1927. The Civil War was long over. The world had moved into machines, radios, and roaring cities. But the land around Rutledge County remained still, untouched, like it refused to forget. Professor Harold Green of the Charleston Historical Society stood at the edge of the woods with 5 others. Their expedition had one purpose: to uncover the foundation of the Wilkes Plantation, a house that local legends called the house that ate the sun. Green adjusted his spectacles, glancing at the yellowed map. "Here," he said, tapping the parchment. "The heart of the property. Right beneath the old nursery." The youngest of the group, Evelyn Shore, shivered. "They say the family disappeared without a trace," she murmured. Green smiled faintly. "Stories, Miss Shore, all stories." But as the wind stirred through the trees, something unseen whispered, soft as a sigh. It sounded almost like a woman's voice. The unearthing. By noon, they began digging through the foundation. Most of the house had collapsed decades ago, leaving behind only blackened stone and roots twisting through the earth like veins. They uncovered bricks, shards of porcelain, rusted nails, and beneath it all, a heavy wooden beam, charred but intact. When they moved it aside, the soil beneath was wet, almost fresh. Evelyn frowned. It shouldn't be this damp. The men laughed. It's a swamp, miss. Always wet down here. But she knelt closer. The dirt glistened red in the light. It wasn't mud. It was blood. Professor, she whispered, the ground is bleeding. Green bent over her shoulder, his face pale. That's impossible. Yet, from the hole came a faint, steady thump. Like a heartbeat. Dash dash dash. The journal. That night, rain began to fall. The group set up camp among the ruins. Green sat under a canvas lamp, reading from a book they had found lodged inside a collapsed wall, a leather-bound journal belonging to Dr. Marin, dated 1853. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. Greater than, the woman gave her life to seal it, but the land remains hungry. The blood binds us all, the living and the dead. The child's cry may yet wake it again. Green read in silence, his lips dry. Evelyn leaned closer. Seal what? He closed the book slowly. I think it refers to an old superstition, something about the heart of the land. But as he said the words, the fire flickered blue. Dash dash dash. The first night, they tried to sleep, but the forest didn't rest. The wind carried sounds, crying, whispering, the distant creak of something rocking. Near midnight, one of the men, Jacob, rose to relieve himself near the ruins. He saw a faint light inside what had been the nursery. A woman stood there, pale as moonlight, hair falling over her face, holding a cradle that swayed gently. He blinked once, and she was gone. But the cradle kept moving. When he screamed, the others came running. They found only his boots in the mud, and a trail of blood leading into the ground. Dash dash dash. The dig continues. By morning, they were shaken, but curiosity is a stronger poison than fear. They continued digging, deeper this time. Evelyn was the first to notice something strange. The soil below the foundation was warm. She pressed her hand to it and felt a pulse. Professor, she said quietly, I think it's alive. He laughed nervously. Nonsense. Heat from underground gas. Pockets, perhaps. But when they dug a few feet deeper, the spade struck something soft, and the ground began to move. It rose slowly, breathing, the soil shifting like a living creature. The sound came again. Thump, 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 dash dash dash. The face in the dirt. Evelyn stepped back as the earth split open. From the soil, a faint red glow pulsed. Not fire, not light, but blood itself shining. And then she saw it. A face forming beneath the dirt, features twisting, eyes opening. It was Eleanor Wilkes. Her mouth moved silently, her lips red as roses. Then her voice came, soft and hollow. Greater than, why did you wake me? Evelyn stumbled back, screaming. The others rushed to pull her away, but the ground swallowed the lantern, plunging them into darkness. The earth rumbled. From every direction, whispers rose, thousands of them, chanting one word. Return. Dash dash dash. The awakening. By dawn, the camp was in ruins. Tents shredded, the fire pit drowned in mud and blood. Green stumbled through the wreckage, clutching the journal. His eyes were wide, wild. It's not a myth, he shouted. It's her. The sacrifice didn't end it, it fed it. Evelyn found him kneeling by the hole. The red light pulsed stronger now, beating faster, like something waking from a long sleep. The professor turned to her, tears in his eyes. Greater than, the heart beneath the house, it never died. She gave it her soul. And now it wants more. Before Evelyn could answer, the earth erupted. Blood and roots burst upward, wrapping around the ruins like claws. The ground split open, and from it rose a shape, half flesh, half soil, a woman's form with no face and no eyes, only a beating heart visible through her chest. It pulsed once, twice, then it spoke. Greater than, I am what was promised. The land remembers. Dash dash dash. Escape. Evelyn and the two surviving men ran for the woods. Behind them, the ruins collapsed inward. The sky turned black though it was morning. Birds dropped from the air. The sound of the heart echoed through the trees. They didn't stop until they reached the road. When they turned back, the plantation was gone, replaced by a pit of red earth that shimmered like an open wound. Evelyn fell to her knees, gasping. "It's awake now, isn't it?" Green's face was ashen. He held the journal tight against his chest. "Greater than, yes," he whispered. "And it's hungry. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, the Charleston Historical Society received a single package in the mail. No return address. Inside was Dr. Marin's journal, wrapped in linen. On the final page, a new line had appeared, written in blood. "Greater than, the heart beneath the house beats again. And soon, it will find a new home. To be continued. Greater than in Part 10. Final, the curse reborn. The darkness spreads beyond the ruins, infecting a modern town built over the forgotten land. Blood will call to blood one last time. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Would you dig up something if you knew it might wake the dead? Would you like me to send Part 10, The Curse Reborn, Final Part, 1000 words, full cinematic conclusion and call to action next? Clapperboard title: The Ghost of Rutledge Plantation, Part 10, The Curse Reborn. Final chapter. Hook YouTube intro. Greater than the heart beneath the house was never destroyed. It only slept, waiting for new blood to feed on. When a new town rises where the plantation once stood, the land remembers, and the curse returns. This is Part 10, The Curse Reborn. Modern times. 100 years passed since the last screams faded from the ruins of the Wilkes plantation. The field was gone, the forest cleared, and a modern town called Wilkes Hollow had risen in its place. It had a school, a church, and a quiet suburban calm that made everyone feel safe. No one spoke of what once stood here, or what might still lie beneath. Until they broke the ground again. The construction. It was the spring of 2023. Developers began digging the foundation for a new luxury subdivision on the south side of town. Excavator operator Tommy Caldwell noticed something strange. Each time his machine struck the soil, the ground seemed to bleed. Dark red water filled the trenches. "Just clay," his foreman said. "This land's got a weird color. Don't worry about it." But that night, Tommy went home with his hands still stained red. No matter how much he scrubbed, the color wouldn't come off. By morning, blisters had formed, and inside each one, something pulsed. The first death. 3 days later, Tommy was found dead in his trailer. Every vein in his body had burst open, his skin white as paper, his eyes filmed over. Police said, chemical exposure. But the coroner's report was sealed. His girlfriend told reporters that the night before he died, Tommy had whispered in his sleep. "Greater than, it's under us. It's still breathing." No one believed her. Not until the second man died the same way. And then the third. The investigator. Enter Drive. Evelyn Shore III, a young archaeologist from the University of Georgia, and the granddaughter of Evelyn Shore, the woman who had survived the 1927 expedition. She'd grown up hearing the stories her grandmother told in whispers, of blood that moved, of earth that breathed, of a heart beneath the house. When the local government called her in to examine odd artifacts found on site, she knew exactly where she was going. As her car rolled into Wilkes Hollow, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. The town looked perfect, too perfect. No birds, no stray dogs, not even the wind seemed to move. The discovery. At the dig site, Evelyn examined the unearthed remains, fragments of wood, bits of pottery, a rusted cradle hook. Her assistant held up a metal box they'd found deep underground. Inside was a small, sealed glass vial filled with thick, dark liquid. The label had faded, but one word was still clear. Marin. Evelyn froze. Dr. Marin, the same name from her grandmother's journal. She lifted the vial to the light. Something inside shimmered, then moved. Before she could react, the glass cracked in her hand. A drop of the dark liquid fell onto the dirt. The ground shivered. A heartbeat echoed beneath her feet. Thump, thump, The night awakens. By dusk, the site was abandoned. Machines stood still, their engines dead. The air felt thick, heavy with moisture, and something else. From the center of the dig pit, the soil began to bubble. Roots burst upward, glistening red. The workers who remained ran, except Evelyn. She stood frozen as the earth split open, revealing a cavity below. Inside, she saw what her grandmother had described a century ago. A pulsing, glowing mass, a heart, enormous and half buried in soil, beating slow and steady. And beside it, a figure. A woman's shape, hair like smoke, skin white as frost. Her eyes opened, two hollow lights. It was Eleanor Wilkes. The reunion. The ghost stepped from the pit, barefoot, her dress trailing blood. When she spoke, her voice echoed from everywhere at once. Greater than, you carry her blood, she said. The one who ran. The one who watched. Evelyn trembled. You mean my grandmother. Greater than, she broke the seal. You finished it. The ghost raised her hand, and the ground erupted. Blood flooded the site, rising in waves. Evelyn fell to her knees, gasping, as the heart beat faster, louder, until it shook the air. Greater than, you built your homes on our graves, the ghost whispered. Now we will live again, through you. The red light enveloped everything. The aftermath. Morning came quietly. The construction site was gone, swallowed whole. The workers vanished. The pit filled itself in overnight. Weeks later, Wilkes Hollow made the news again, but not for tragedy. Residents claimed to hear strange sounds beneath their basements. Soft, steady heartbeats. Plants grew unnaturally fast. Water from the taps ran red for seconds at a time. And people changed. Neighbors who were kind and gentle became cold, detached, like something else was moving behind their eyes. A new name began to circulate online. The Heart Town. The legacy. In her final journal entry, found months later in an abandoned car outside town, Drive. Evelyn Shore wrote, Greater than, it isn't a ghost. It's the land itself. The blood remembers. The soul endures. When we feed the earth, it learns the taste of us. Her body was never found. But her voice still echoes. Locals claim that on quiet nights, if you press your ear to the ground near the old churchyard, you can hear her whisper. Greater than, it's awake. Ending YouTube outro plus call to action. Greater than the Rutledge curse never ended. It just changed its name. If you ever visit Wilkes Hollow, don't stay after dark. The land remembers every drop of blood it's ever tasted. And it's always hungry for more. Fire if you enjoyed this chilling series. Subscribe for more true-style horror stories from history. Like, share, and comment below. Speech balloon, would you dare live in Wilkes Hollow, knowing what lies beneath your home? Until next time, keep your lights low, and your doors locked.